And then if anybody, I know there's a one lady who's messaged me this morning to say she couldn't join for power cut reasons, etc., and stuff has been going on, and she asked me if I could send the recording out, so that's absolutely fine. I can do that, no problem at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to flick across then from those slides that are rotating and just move across to the main session deck and welcome you. We have another lady come in. There we go, Miss Culverwell. Excellent stuff. That was excellent timing. Good morning. I'm not so sure if she can hear me just yet. There we go. Good morning. Is it Miss Culverwell? Hello, you okay? Just let's see if
it's Nikki.
Oh, well, hello, Nikki. You can actually change your name if you hover over your name. If you see it on the participants panel, so if you open that participants panel, and then you should see the list of your names. I am going to go through this in a second, and you can actually change your name, just in case you didn't know.
I'll try.
That's all right. Right at the very, very bottom of your screen, if you wiggle your mouse, you should see participants. Aha. And then hover over your name, and you'll get more, and then it's rename. There you go. So very formal, Miss Culverwell. There we go. So we have Nikki.
Do you know what it is? I've got a MacBook, that's why, and I just put my finger over like that, and it just does an automatic.
Yeah, it brings you in.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nikki, it's lovely to have you.
Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well.
Excellent stuff. Okay, so let's get cracking then. We'll find out a little bit more about you guys in just a few moments. So welcome then to this 90-minute session, just to give you some heads up on what we've been doing in regards to things like mental toughness, coaching, the EMCC accredited course, etc., that we have linked with this. And I would just really like to kind of introduce me and Doug first of all, before we kind of get into the bits and pieces what we're going to be doing this morning. So my name's Sam Sloan. I'm the founder and creator of 123 People Development, and I'm the lady that wrote the Coaching with Purpose program. And I approached Doug and said, I think your psychometrics work beautifully with this. I'd like to work very much with you. And that's exactly what it is that we've done. And we've got the course accredited now. But I'll give you those details and a lot more information about that as we start to move through. I'm from Manchester, got 2 kids, grown up now, thankfully. Yes, left home, fledged. And yes, it allows me lots of time to work now. But I will just introduce Doug as well. Doug, if you just want to open up your mic as well.
All right, it is open.
Oh yeah, it is. That's it. Just introduce yourself, Doug.
Okay, so I'm Doug Straharczyk. I'm the CEO for AQR International, which started life just over 30 years ago. I founded it at that time as a consultancy that focused on senior leadership in organizations. We tended to do a lot of work around top team development. And over the years, we kind of began to use psychometrics a lot more in our work. And we were very fortunate at one stage to recruit a young psychologist called Peter Clough, who we now know as Professor Peter Clough. And Peter came into the organization with an idea. He did leave the organization to pursue a career in academia, but we'd formed a bond which has continued to this day. And between us, we've taken Peter's concept, which was mental toughness, to, well, quite a sophisticated level. And just to give you a measure for it, we now work in 80 countries around the world, actually probably more than 80. We keep saying 80, but I do know that we've actually brought some more countries on board. So the concept, it has spread. The concept, of course, is mental toughness.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Doug. It's a fascinating subject. It really is. And my experience as a coach over this last 30 years, I just kind of brought everything together, and it just worked beautifully with those psychometrics that Doug's just mentioned there. But we will be having a look at that in a bit more detail. So I'm really keen to get you guys involved in this particular session this morning. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands how to use all the tools and the functionality. So you have a mute button that should be located at the very bottom of your toolbar on the screen, and the video. Please feel free to pop the videos on and off if you wish. And of course, just unmute yourself if there's any background noise at all. We do have a participants and emoticons panel as well. Again, I think this is the one that I've just invited Nikki to open. If you open up that participants panel, which is located, like I've said, on that bottom toolbar, and also the chat panel, you may as well open both. And if you double click on the slide, it throws the tools over onto the right hand side, the chat and the participants, and then they're going to be there for you throughout the duration of the session. And please feel free to use them all the way through. If you could just give me a green tick then on your participants panel, just to let me know that you have access to those tools, that would be cool. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Nikki. And I just want to make sure that we've got Diane, who is able to also use those tools as well. Okay, you all right there, Diane? You don't have to necessarily use the tools, but I would just encourage you to do so.
I'll figure it out. Keep going. Thank you.
No problem. That's absolutely fine. It's located right at the very bottom of your screen, and there should be a toolbar and it says participants and chat. Same thing with chat. Please feel free to use chat. And I'll be asking you to pop some comments, etc. in there as well. And again, please feel free to pop any questions in there that you have throughout the session. We also have the annotation tools. These are located, oh, we just have another person coming in now as well. We have the annotation tools as well, and these are located right at the very top of your screen this time. And you should see a little icon that says you are viewing Sam Sloan's screen. We have view options, and if you just go onto that drop down menu there, you have annotate. We're going to go on to the next slide in just a moment. Let me just go and say hello to Hang. Good morning, Hang. Let me see if I can unmute Hang. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hello, you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm here well. Hello, everybody.
Excellent stuff. Where are you calling from, Hang?
I'm calling from Vietnam.
From Vietnam. Wow, goodness me. You definitely win.
So it is afternoon for us.
Furthest away.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, welcome, Hang. It's lovely to have you with us this afternoon, of course, for you. We're just going through the tools, Hang. So are you familiar with Zoom?
Sorry.
Are you familiar with Zoom?
Hold on a minute. I will need to find me a place.
Okay. All right. No problem.
I'm still at the office and I need to find a quiet place.
All right. No, don't you worry. Not at all. Okay, so if you've opened up your participants panel, what I'd like you to do is just start to complete this word search for me. Sorry, your annotation tools. So if you select the drawing tool, you can then, and you may well notice a few words that are coming up on here that will form part of the program as well. And this is really just to get you to use the tools. And once you have selected from your annotation tools, the draw tool, then you can select a couple of, I'm just going to also do some as well. Oh, I noticed one a moment ago. There we go. And then score it out on that left-hand side. There we go. This is just to get you using the tools. I found one a minute ago. Ah, there it is. Somebody's already got it. Superb. I'll just give you another moment or two. That's excellent. Have you managed to find those as well, Diane, the annotation tools? No problem. All right, what I'm going to do, I am literally just going to just see who's actually, I can, oh, even Doug's playing. Nikki's playing, Catherine's playing, Tony's playing. Okay, that's absolutely awesome, no problem. I'm not going to go through all of them. It was literally just to kind of have a little bit of a play as well. Oh, thank you, Hang, that's perfect as well. You found a great one there, that development. Superb. Okay, let me just move forwards so we can just see all of the correct answers as well. So excellent stuff. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's kind of move into the main session content then. And again, we're going to be using those annotation tools. And what I'd like to know is, what would you like to gain from the session today? What are you here for? Don't know if Diane's having a few technical issues. She's logged out. If you could just select the T and then select So I'm going to type my name in one of the columns on the left-hand side and then type in your answer. What is it that you would like to gain from the session today? What are you here for? What would you like to know? And don't worry if you type over each other. Oh, we've lost Hang as well, bless them. So maybe a few technical issues going on. See faces, Zoom faces are always quite amusing when you're trying to type and things. Me and one of my colleagues have been taking screenshots of us when we've been doing Zoom faces. It's been quite funny. We're going to do a compilation, I feel. Okay, so Doug's put what coaches are looking for. Excellent stuff. Catherine's saying to find out more about mental toughness and coaching. Excellent. Nikki's saying there, I've been invited last night. Ah, so you don't know. So you don't know what you don't know. That's absolutely fine, no problem. It looks like we've got Hang back with us as well. Hang, let me just open up your mic. What would you like to, there we go, the typing as well. Oh, bless you. Thank you for the dedication and keep trying to give it a go. Hang, what would you like to get from the session today? Quite like the fact that you can see. Or I can just open up your mic. Hang, let me just unmute your mic.
Okay, now I can talk. Okay, can you hear me well?
Yeah, what is it that you'd like to get from the session today, Hang?
I want to focus on resilient coaching and catching the body expression of the coachee.
Oh, okay, no problem. That's certainly something that we focus on throughout the Coaching with Purpose course. So that's superb. Okay, thank you very much, Hang.
Thank you.
That is wonderful. Okay, so let me just clear down those drawings and then we can just move the slides on. Okay, so we are going to focus initially on mental toughness, of course, this morning. But what I'd like to know, first of all, before we kind of go through anything and before Doug does his talk through around the concept, I'd like to know, what do you currently know about mental toughness? You can open your mic, you can pop it into chat. It's completely up to you. What do you currently know about mental toughness and the concept in relation to coaching? Thank you, Hang, for popping your camera on as well.
Hi.
Hi. Not very much, Catherine's saying. Thank you for your honesty there, Catherine. That's awesome.
I assume that it is the mentee who have difficulty overcome their challenges or accept that the development challenges.
Okay, so yeah, it could be part of the mentee or the coach, absolutely, or the coachee, but it could also be the coach as well. Yeah. So we're going to kind of have a look at it from both sides. Absolutely. What about you, Nikki? What's your, and you're probably, I only found out about it last night and I'm just coming this morning. We're back to that again.
Well, I think Nikki's quite knowledgeable about the subject.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. That's superb. That's what we like to hear. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Doug now just to talk us through the concept then and how it links to coaching and how we can really utilize this tool to our best advantage. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, so the focus of mental toughness should be on the word mental. It is about what happens in your head and what happens in your mind. Quite often people are distracted by the word toughness because they think that somehow means this is about being macho or tough in some sort of very aggressive way. It isn't. It is about your mental strength. It's about your ability to deal with the challenges you face mentally. So we have a definition, and it's an important definition. It is a personality trait, and we will look at that in a minute, which determines in some part, so we It's big part of the solution. It's not the whole of the solution. It determines how individuals respond mentally when exposed to stress, pressure, challenge, and opportunity, irrespective of the prevailing situation. Now that definition we've just updated by adding the word mentally in, because before it had the word, just had the word respond. People thought it was about behavior. It's important that we understand that it is predominantly about our mental responses. So we can move on to the next slide, please, Sam. So we're going to ask a question. You may or may not understand the terms, but what we know is that mental toughness consists of 4 components, which are called constructs in psychology. That's control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. So Sam is about to ask you to complete a little poll. Which do you think is the most important for you as a coach?
Is it performance? Is it agility of those behaviours? Is it well-being? Or is it aspirations? What do you think? And you can select one answer and then press submit on the very bottom. Okay, fantastic. So let me just end that poll and then I can share those results and it will pop back up. So we have one individual saying performance. Absolutely, performance within an organisation is super important. Well-being, I think that's the definite buzzword at the moment, and Doug's going to talk us through this in just a second. And of course, one individual has put aspirations down as well. So brilliant stuff. Thank you. Just really intrigued to sort of see what your thoughts and comments were there. Back to you, Doug.
That's a really interesting pattern of responses, because when we've done this in previous occasions, you do get 2 big spikes, and they do happen to correspond to performance and well-being. And in one sense, that's a trick question, because 3 of those are definitely interrelated. Performance, agility, and well-being are very closely interrelated. It is almost impossible to get any one of those without attending to the other 2 as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. So when we talk about performance, what we know is that the mental toughness of an individual, as assessed through the Mental Toughness Questionnaire, the MTQ+, accounts for 25% generally of the variation in performance between individuals. So if you have a high-performing individual and a low-performing individual, generally you'll find you can explain 25% of their difference in performance by their differences in mental toughness or mental sensitivity. Now, those of you who are really interested in knowing more about this, I've literally yesterday put out a post on LinkedIn about this, because this 25% figure can often be misunderstood. Because in general, there is 25% variation, what that means on average. But of course, that also means that some people will achieve less and some people will achieve more. And there are good reasons for that. And coaches need to understand that. But that's for another day. Next slide, please, Sam. Agility. This is grown in importance over this century. As we have learned to talk about this so-called VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and the speed at which things change, what we've understood is that some people are able to deal well with the change and this pace of change, and other people are less able to do that. Again, research, and we're talking about 120 research papers that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, show that there's a link between the mental toughness of an individual or the mental sensitivity and their ability to be agile in this very dynamic world that we live in. Next slide, Sam. Now, this topic is bit by bit has risen to the top of the agenda. And we're quite fortunate again in that an awful lot of the research around mental toughness, particularly in the University of Basel, who have got a specialist unit within the psychology department looking at well-being has shown that there is a link between mental toughness and things like dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression. There are suicidality studies that show that mental toughness, if you're mentally tough, you're less likely to be suicidal. And interestingly, a very important study on the relationship with sleep. We know that people who are mentally tough are better able to get a good night's sleep than people who are mentally sensitive. So there's a lot of work around mental health and well-being and its relationship with mental toughness. And of course, a lot of that is very closely linked to performance. You can't perform if you're not enjoying good well-being. Next slide, please. And the final area is aspirations. And again, as human beings, we kind of start our journey through life hoping that we might be able to achieve something more each day and eventually achieve some bigger goals. And we accept that this is going to take time. What we know is that the mentally tough are better able to visualize success and better able to plan and execute those plans to achieve that success. Next slide, please, Sam. So, why am I talking about personality? Well, one of the important things here is that most people I speak to nowadays are pretty much aware of what personality is. They have most likely completed several personality measures. But the fact is that almost all of those personality measures that you and others will have completed will have been behavioral personality measures. And we're very familiar with behavioral personality models. And by that, I mean, these are concepts that describe and measures that predict how we act when things happen. That's quite useful to know. And obviously it's got a big role in recruitment because when you're recruiting people, you don't know how they're going to behave or how they're going to act in certain situations. And so to be able to have some sort of useful and reliable predictor of that can be helpful. However, behavior is complex because our behavior comes from many, many different sources. It could be down to our abilities, our interests, our preferences, the kind of support we have, and so on. So behavior is complex, but next slide, please, Sam. What mental toughness is assessing is not how we act when things happen, but how we think when things happen. Psychologists call this a metacognitive response. Now, the important thing about that is that one of the biggest influences on your behavior is how you think. Now, we've known that for a long time. In fact, we've known that for 2,500 years, ever since Plato identified fortitude as one of the 4 virtues. What we've not been able to do is understand exactly how that works. We can now. We have a much better grasp of how that connection between how you think and how you act happens, which means, next slide please, Sam, that we can begin to understand why you act the way you do when something happens. And this is anticipating a slide that we're going to come across in shortly. Isn't this what coaches are trying to do with their clients? They're helping them to understand why they respond to events that are important to them in the way they do. And of course, if we can understand why you respond in a particular way and where that source is, then we can direct interventions much more confidently and much more reliably to the area of concern. Next. Now, what that means is that this becomes the key to, next slide, self-awareness. And basically, there is a very, very important role to play for mental toughness in self-awareness. And self-awareness, of course, is the goal of a coach, to help the person to understand what's happening to them and why they're responding the way they do. And in fact, again, if people begin to look at some of the posts that myself and AQR have been issuing in recent times, we're beginning to raise awareness of self-awareness, because sometimes we forget that being mentally tough or developing mental toughness is not necessarily our goal. Our goal is to understand why we're responding the way we do in order to achieve another outcome. An outcome is not necessarily being more mentally tough or more mentally sensitive or whatever. It's a new paragraph. Sorry, next slide, please. So, what's the difference between mental toughness and resilience? Is this an exercise, Sam? I've forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, we can ask the guys this. What do they, after this description, or a little bit of a description here that Doug's given, what do you think the difference is between mental toughness and resilience? Because this is another word at the moment that seems to be quite high out there in the headlines, shall we say, as long as with well-being. So what would you say the difference is? Because this is a question that we get asked a lot. You could give us a
quite simple to me.
Sounds quite simple. Okay, thank you, Hang.
No, similar. I mean the mental toughness from what you describe, it sounds familiar to resilient to me.
Ah, right. Okay. Yes, I completely agree in one sense. However, what about Catherine and Nikki? I know Nikki's a little bit more up on this. Catherine, any ideas from you?
I think the same as Hang. I think they sound really similar.
Okay.
I wouldn't know.
All right. So let's come to Doug then for the house answer.
Okay, so, and I'll illustrate it by looking at something called the pizza image, which comes up in a couple of slides. But there is a difference, but there is also a connection. You're quite right. But what we need to do is to be accurate about what we mean by these two terms. Resilience is generally defined as our ability to respond to an adverse situation. In other words, something goes wrong and we are still able to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and carry on going. Now, that is a very powerful quality to have. But what researchers have begun to understand over time, and this was a breakthrough by a woman called Suzanne Cabasa, is that she began to understand that resilience is what we'd call a passive concept. In other words, we're responding to something. We're not necessarily saying, I want to beat it. What we're doing is something's gone wrong, I have to respond. And you're not necessarily bringing into play a positive approach. So she began to understand that there was something else other than resilience that was helping people to become successful. And she identified one of the qualities that we now know is part of mental toughness, this notion of challenge. That some people look at the world around them, recognize that it's full of problems and challenges, and they go out and they actually enjoy dealing with them. And so mental toughness, if you like, is bringing together the concept of positivity. I see the world full of opportunity and I'm not going to let it beat me, with the notion of resilience, which is much more of a passive concept. So mental toughness embraces resilience, which is why sometimes people will see them as very similar, but actually it's a wider and much more valuable concept than purely looking at resilience. Next slide, please, Sam. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the elements of mental toughness, and it's what we call the 4 C's. We referred to them earlier. That's control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. So we can have the next slide, Sam.
I was going to bring in a poll now.
All right, now go on.
I was going to ask you, what is the 4 C's? So let's just see if you were listening to Doug just a second ago. Let's see if you can see what they are.
Right. Did I get them right?
Yes. Now, in fairness, there's a little bit of a clue.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Superb. Thank you for that, everybody. Chocolate mouse for everybody. Well done.
Thank you. And as we can see on the image, there's part of the explanation of what's the difference between mental toughness and resilience. You can see that we can represent the elements of mental toughness on what we call a pizza image, that the elements in the top half of the image represent resilience, the elements on the bottom half represent positivity. And putting them together creates this notion of mental toughness, which allows us to approach life partly in a stoic fashion and partly in a positive fashion. We know that life is difficult. It's not going to be without its problems. And we can either be optimistic and positive about approaching those problems, or we can be pessimistic and fearful of approaching those problems. But next paragraph, sorry, next slide, please.
Just interested to see what the link is with coaching.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. So if we look at the 4 constructs, the 4 C's, the first one is control. And control, bear in mind that it's an aspect of your mindset, but we will illustrate it by talking about the consequences for behaviors. When we're talking about control, what we're describing is the extent to which in your head you think you can control enough of your life and circumstances to be able to achieve what you need to achieve. Now, note, it's about controlling enough, not believing you can control everything. Because the reality, as we know, is you can't control everything, but you should just try to control what you can control and worry much less about what you can't control. Now, the research shows that this sense of control has 2 components. One component is called life control, and that's where the sense of can-do sits. This is where, if you were to ask somebody, I need to get this piece of work done, it has to be done by tonight, some people will respond by saying, leave it with me, I'll have a go. Other people will say, oh, I'm not sure I can do it. I can do it if, I might be able to do it, I'll have to go and talk to somebody else. So some people will respond to what they're asked to do or the challenges they face with a sense of self-worth. They think they can do it, even if they don't know that they can do it. Others take a different view. Those are people who will be mentally sensitive on that scale. But that often interplays with another aspect of control, and that's what we call emotional control, but it's actually probably the wrong term. It's about emotional management. We can't we can't control our emotions. So when things happen, somebody comes to us at the last minute to ask us to do an urgent job, we can get emotional about it. We can get angry, we might be pleased about it. But we need to be able to manage those emotional responses in order to stay in control of ourselves, our life, and our situation. Some of us are able to manage our emotional responses to events. Others allow those emotional responses to manage us. So this sense of control consists of these 2 elements that can interplay both with each other and the other factors that I'm about to describe. So if we move on to commitment, that's a well-established concept, but what we've been able to do in the last 2 or 3 years is clarify that commitment, which is about the extent to which I make promises and the extent to which I'll keep those promises, consists of those 2 elements. So one element is goal orientation. And interestingly, what this means is that some of us are very good at visualizing what we need to do, and in theory at least, that visualization of what success looks like should be a motivator. Other people don't think in terms of goals at all, and they are unable to visualize success in this way. And some people are even, they might be able to visualize success, but they're frightened of it. And so mental toughness at one end is goal orientated, mental sensitivity at the other end is not goal orientated. But that interplays with achievement orientation, because we know very well from our work that Some people will promise you the earth and they'll have set a myriad or a whole pile of goals, but there's no one necessarily do what's expected. And so there is another aspect of our mindset which impacts on our determination to do whatever it is that we have to do in order to deliver our goals, to keep our promises. And some people have a high level of achievement orientation, other people have a low level of achievement orientation. And that's, you know, they may not be prepared to make an effort, or making an effort is somehow disagreeable to them. So those two elements that I've described, control and commitment, are describing the core elements of resilience. So if something adverse has happened, can I still do what I set out to do? That's control. And will I still make the effort? That's commitment. But we're now going to move on to the third of the C's, and that's challenge. And in a way, this is describing, if you like, the beating heart of mental toughness. Because when Kabasa talked about challenge, what she described it in terms of challenge as describing the extent to which we see opportunities rather than threats. But of course, we know that some people, when they're faced with an event, will see the problems and the threats. Other people will see the opportunity and the solution. It's an aspect of mindset. You know, they may have exactly the same background, training, qualifications, knowledge, but in their minds, they'll be approaching the thing in two different ways. And what we know from very, very recent research is that challenge consists of two elements. And the first one is risk orientation. Now, it's not necessarily talking about taking wild risks. It's about being prepared to open yourself to new experiences, to deal with challenge, to deal with change. And if you think about the present times, you know, whether you're talking about the VUCA world or you're talking about the COVID-19 world, the COVID-19 pandemic has imposed some dramatic changes on our lives. And I find it quite interesting that some people are responding well to it, even in an opportunist way, and other people aren't. So for instance, I saw at the weekend that a survey had found that 41% of people had not left their house in the last 5 weeks. So some people were responding well to the risk, other people were responding quite differently, much less well. But this is determining the extent to which we are prepared to explore opportunities. So our growth will often come from our ability to stretch those boundaries a little bit at a time. However, even people who will stretch themselves or try new things will often find that those things don't work for them. And that's the nature of risk. You know, when you're taking risks, you're trying new things, very often they don't quite work out the way you wanted them to. And what we can see is, and I'm just exaggerating to make a point here, is you can find two different patterns of response. Firstly, somebody will try something, it doesn't work, and the response will be, that didn't work, I'm never doing that again, bin it. Others will say, that didn't work, it was uncomfortable. However, I think I've learned something from that experience, and I think I know how to do it better. I'm going to give it another go. And so learning orientation is critically important. It probably is right at the heart of our understanding of mental toughness. What this means is that people who've got a high level of learning orientation, who are mentally tough in that regard, will extract learning from everything that they see and that happens to them as they progress through life. People who've got low levels will not learn from all their experiences and the experiences of others. And for them, progress through life might be very slow and might actually not happen at all. In terms of coaching, this is quite a critical thing. We've already got case studies that illustrate that if a coach is trying to work with somebody with a low level of learning orientation, they're going to find it very difficult. We know that's true in training situations as well. If you have a room full of people who really aren't open to learning, you're wasting your time. So challenge has proved to be one of the important developments of our understanding of the concept in the last 4 or 5 years. And that leads us to the fourth of the constructs, confidence. And this is the component that Peter Clough brought into play, because the other 3 components were understood. It wasn't quite clear how they joined together. There was an attempt to try and create a concept, but people still understood there was a missing link. And it's, in hindsight, it's fascinating to see how something as relevant as confidence could have been missed in all the earlier research. But it was, and Peter Clough spotted that it was, and he spotted that it consisted of 2 elements. And the first one is confidence and abilities. This is an interesting factor because it's got an interesting relationship with abilities. It's more about confidence than it is about ability. What this is saying is that some of us may be very skilled, maybe very able, very knowledgeable, but we may still doubt ourselves. So this is about self-belief. So if we don't believe in our abilities, even though we've got stacks of them, we don't use them. On the other hand, and quite sadly, sometimes, you can have people who've got moderate amounts of ability or very little ability, who've got some self-belief that think they've got a lot of ability. They can be quite difficult to deal with. But this is about helping people to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And that goes hand in hand with another aspect of confidence, and that's interpersonal confidence. And when we talk about interpersonal confidence, what we're talking about here is my ability, or the extent to which in my mind I have it that I can influence you as much as you influence me. And it's about being prepared to stand your ground. I have an idea, you're not listening to it, I'm going to make sure you listen to it. Don't necessarily want you to give ground to me, but I'm going to make sure you listen to it. And of course, this is critically important. And we first came across this when we were doing some work with the UK Customs and Excise operation. What we found was that you could have some very clever, knowledgeable people in a meeting, and you can have people who were much more assertive in the meeting, who knew less about a subject, and they would often win the argument, even though they knew less about a subject than the experts did. So we began to understand that being able to express yourself, being able to be reasonably assertive is an important aspect of this. So that's the 4 constructs of mental toughness, the 4 C's, and the 8 factors that underpin them. The important thing to understand, there are 2 important things to understand here. One is those 8 factors are all independent of each other. What that means is you can have high and low scores or high and low levels across all of those 8 factors. Believe it or not, that means there are 40,000 different possible combinations of profile. And that also is critically important, because it means with the mental toughness concept, we can begin to deal with people as individuals. And of course, as individuals, we are very, very complex people. We're not all of a similar type. So one of the things that we tend to do is we tend not to support typing instruments that put people into boxes. This is not about putting people into boxes. This is talking about trying to identify you as an individual. Now, before I go any further, what I need to stress, though, is I've been talking about mental toughness and occasionally referring to mental sensitivity. Mental toughness itself is a spectrum. It applies to mental toughness overall, each of the constructs and each of the factors. You can be mentally tough and mentally sensitive on each of those. They are not good or bad. Being mentally tough or mentally sensitive is simply who you are. As I mentioned before, the critical thing is self-awareness, because what we know is, yes, the mentally sensitive may have some disadvantages when they're trying to make their way through life, but with self-awareness, if they understand their mental sensitivity and are prepared to develop strategies to deal with any possible downsides, they can be as effective as anybody else. Now that is, I think, important in coaching. In coaching, I find a lot of coaches tend to focus on the people who are already mentally tough. But similarly, it's interesting, if you have a mentally tough individual, that individual can also fail to perform because of a lack of self-awareness. So it's very easy to have too high a sense of control. You think you can do everything, but you can't. High level of commitment. You try to achieve every goal under the sun, but you can't. Risk orientation. You try to take too many risks. And in terms of confidence, you think you've got abilities, but you haven't. It's very easy for a mentally tough individual to fail. So we're not talking about mental toughness and mental sensitivity as good or bad. We're talking about as an aspect of you that we need to understand to be able to achieve some higher level objectives. I use a phrase, it's an enabler, it's not the outcome. And next slide, please. Now, what does a report look like? This is what the report looks like, and it's, you know, it looks like most psychometric test reports, but it actually carries a massive amount of information. This is a real profile for a real individual from earlier this year. Somebody who had been thriving for many years and suddenly found himself struggling in a COVID-19 setup. If you look at his overall mental toughness score, it's 7, STEM 7. That would position him towards one of the more mentally tough people on this planet. And he's a very successful senior manager in a major international organization. So this looks like an explanation. This is what you'd expect. And in fact, if you look at some of the factors, life control, goal orientation, achievement orientation, risk orientation, confidence and abilities, and interpersonal confidence, we can see this person is pretty mentally tough on all of these important aspects. However, we can also note that actually he's not got high scores at everything. And emotional control, his score is STEM 3. That puts him into the bottom 16% of the global population in terms of being able to manage emotions. And his score is actually indicating an even lower level when we look at learning orientation. This individual had performed really well pre-COVID, had built a fantastic team, and then, as often happened in COVID-19, the team had to disperse and work from home. This person began to experience difficulties. He first of all didn't recognize that he had a comparatively low level of emotional control. However, the coach worked with him very productively, and bit by bit he began to understand that his emotional control wasn't great, and that the coping mechanism for his low level of emotional control was the rest of his team. Basically, if he was very happy and over-enthusiastic, they would generally bring him down to earth. And if he was in a bad mood or angry or annoyed, they also learned how to deal with him. They liked him as a boss. He was a very good boss, but they accepted that he had this aspect and they dealt with him. And he was working at home on his own. He hadn't got his team around him. Nobody was spotting his emotional responses to events, and so they were beginning to run out of control. As an example of the kind of information that you can get out of the questionnaire, but importantly, what this is also telling us, at one stage, this person will be described as a mentally tough individual. Most of us aren't mentally tough or mentally sensitive. We're a mixture of both. And that is really important to understand. We are as individual as that. So to talk about mental toughness or mental sensitivity, or even things like growth mindset and fixed mindset, they're much too high level concepts for practitioners like yourselves to be able to apply and use effectively with your clients. So, next slide, Sam. If we can go back to that STEM report, is there anything else that people might see in this STEM graph?
What else have you kind of noticed that you may bring to the forefront in maybe a coaching conversation?
It's a trick question, I suppose, without completing the training and understanding the mental toughness questionnaire, but there's a massive amount of information. So for instance, the fact that this person has a low level of learning orientation indicates that this person doesn't learn from what happens to them.
Yep.
So as they hit problems, instead of trying to analyze the problem and coming up with a solution, they kind of binned it. They would then repeat mistakes, and the repeating of mistakes would interplay with their emotional control and create a downward spiral. And moreover, what we see as their strengths, high levels of life control and very high levels of risk orientation, when you add it to a low level of emotional control, they turn from strengths into problems.
Yeah.
Because this person is somebody who thinks, I can do it. They suddenly find they can't, and the response is emotional and they can't deal with it.
Yeah.
Similarly with risk orientation, they push themselves too far, doesn't work, they're not learning from it, and their emotional control again kicks in, and life becomes more difficult for the individual. We could sit here and we could look at these interplays for the next 4 or 5 hours, which we won't do, and we would extract a massive amount of information, especially if we were engaging with a client and exploring each of those links.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. And the more I learn about it, and the more you kind of dig deeper into it, it's just a fascinating concept on what it unpicks for you and the coach. Okay. Thank you, Doug. Great quote here from John Whitmore. Which is from the the book Coaching for Performance, of course. Coaching is unlocking people's potential to maximize their own performance. It's helping them to learn rather than teaching them. And this, for me, is exactly what the mental toughness concept brings to those coaching interventions. Okay, I was going to pop you guys into breakouts, but unfortunately, Nikki's just had to nip off. I'm more than happy to do that if Catherine... we have a Leah and we have a Hang in session. There's just 3 of you. Would you guys like the opportunity just to go into a separate room just for a couple of minutes to just have a little bit of a chat about how you feel using the mental toughness concept could help with your coaching interventions? Quite happy to do that for you.
I have a question.
Go for it.
It seems like you have to do a whole bunch of analysis with the coachee to identify their personality traits, to be able to coach them in the right direction, to foresee the issues they probably facing. But it's not most of the case we wouldn't have that kind of opportunity. So how do we apply the concept in that cases?
Are we talking if you've had the licensed user training, for instance? Because if you just get the report without the licensed user training, then it's going to be relatively difficult for you to understand the concept. Is that what you were meaning?
What I mean is if the coachee haven't done any report, and we can spot out what is the strength and weakness of the coachee. You know, like the STEM report, we don't have that for the coachee. So how can we apply the mental toughness concept?
It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible, Hang, because with behavioral measures, you can observe behaviors and you can discuss behaviors. With emotions, you can describe emotions. People can describe the way they feel, and as a coach, you can access that. But what we're looking at here is what is happening inside your head or somebody or the client's head. And you can't see that. You can't see inside their head, which is why, although coaching addresses that and coaching traditionally has tried to approach it through a behavioral channel, what we now understand is we've got a much better way of understanding what's happening in that person's head, but it does really require understanding the framework, the mental toughness framework, and the questionnaire. What we've found is that if people, and we're talking about coaches, try to assess what's happening inside somebody's head without the support of something like a questionnaire, they get it wrong an awful lot of the time. Because from the outside, it is very difficult to be able to differentiate between life control and confidence and abilities and goal orientation. But they are very different. And if you misdiagnose, you end up addressing the wrong problem. And we've seen that. We've seen people think they are improving something and they actually make it worse.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just to kind of alleviate some of those sort of concerns that you have as well, Hang, when you receive a report, you can have a choice of 3 reports, and you receive an assessment report, you receive a development report, and you receive a coaching report or for the coach, if you like. And it gives you some narration in regards to each of the STEM reports. So let me just share with you. I've just brought up mine just so you can just see. It may be quite small, but this is one of my reports that I did a couple of years ago, and it actually tells you how to use the report. So it's not just you're getting those STEM scores, it also gives you some information around each of those STEM scores as well. And this is like my overall mental toughness, for instance, control, and it gives you some things to talk through and talk around with that coach and coachee conversation that's going to be happening. So it's not just a case of doing it from that bar graph that we saw just a few moments ago, that STEM report. So the narration within the reports are actually really useful to help us formulate our conversations, and of course to develop that self-awareness that I just mentioned just a few moments ago. But ideally, yes, to go through the training would be most definitely advisable, so you are fully equipped to be effective with that particular individual.
I see. So this is a specific tool to analyze and diagnose the mental toughness for the coachee, for individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I come across so many different type of questionnaires. So I just wonder, whether we have to be, we have to use these specific tools.
Well, it's the only reliable and valid metacognitive measure. In other words, there's measuring your mental responses. Almost every other measure is measuring your behavioral responses, which are not the same thing.
Absolutely. And the narration within each report is specific to you as well. So it's a really bespoke report. Fantastic. Thank you, Hang. Just another quote there from John Whitmore as well, about focusing on the future and not past mistakes. So a couple of questions then. We're going to start to focus on the workshop in just a few moments, the Coaching with Purpose workshop, of course, where we use the mental toughness concepts. And thank you very much to Doug there for talking us through it, because of course he is the expert. But what I'd like to know is, what are the current challenges that we are facing around COVID now in this new world of ours, this VUCA world that Doug mentioned just a few moments ago? You can open your mics. Lynn, you've got, you can pop your camera on and open your mic. Please feel free to join in with the conversations as well. What challenges are we facing at the moment?
I guess a big one is moving online and doing things virtually rather than face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I had £1 for people that have been asking me, how do you coach online? How is it that you do it? How can you be successful when you're not sat in the same room as somebody, is a question that I'm getting asked more and more. Most definitely. So that's a massive challenge. Why is that a challenge specifically though? Because the online proposition was always there. We've done coaching online before. Why all of a sudden has it become more of a challenge now? Because we've always done it.
Yeah, but then I guess not everybody has. And I think it's that perception that you need to be to get that personal connection, you need to physically be near somebody and see somebody there.
Yeah, most definitely. When people recognize and realize that actually it can be very, very effective over these types of platforms, especially where the cameras are on, etc., and things like contracting has taken place, all of the same things that you would do in a normal you know what I mean, previous world coaching session when we were actually allowed to sit in the same room as somebody. But yeah, it's a very real challenge at the moment, and something that the course actually looks at. How is it that we can do this now in this particular environment? How is it that we can be effective? Okay, so let's just come into what it is specifically that we do cover in the workshop as well. So one of the things that we really focus on is what skills do we specifically need to be a coach? And these are the things that when I wrote the program that I really wanted to focus our attention on throughout the workshop, so coaches were leaving the workshop fully equipped and able to hit the ground running. And that also includes the virtual skills as well. Now, I've been relatively whizzy with this particular slide because I'd like you to type on this particular slide for me in regards to what you feel the skills are that you really do need to become not just a good coach, but a great coach. And you can use your annotation tools here. Just because the slide's moving doesn't mean to say that they're not going to type, because they will. Thank you, Hang there, that's perfect. Lynn, if you go up to the very top of your screen, if you want to get involved here, please feel free to open up the annotation toolbar, and that's located in the options section or the drop down in the options section. And just open up your little annotation toolbar and that will allow you to type. Oh, okay, interpersonal confidence there, so Hang's saying, because the 4Cs concept is woven right the way through the program. So absolutely, and we do the coach intervention as well, which is something that we're going to talk about just a few moments. Okay, so emotional control as well, superb. So again, these are the types of things that you can bring with you as a coaching challenge to the workshop that we can then specifically focus on, and of course use our reports to be able to do that. Listening skills, Catherine's saying. Yes, most definitely. I think that's one of the most understated skills, listening, because it's not just about listening to others, it's also about listening to ourselves. And just let's take that in regards to confidence, for instance. If you're maybe highly mentally tough, you may not listen to that internal chatter sometimes that gets you to take that risk, maybe a little more than you should, and maybe those learning orientation isn't quite switched on as it could be. So it's not just about listening to others, it's also about listening to ourselves. And this is something that we also concentrate very much on within the workshop. And oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click on then. That non-directive communication, I wanted to do that, is select that. So that was also Hang as well. Non-directive communication, just tell me a little bit more about that, Hang. What was you mean in regards to that?
I refer to Carl Rogers. He's a psychologist, and he initiates the idea of non-directive questionings, where you empower the coaches and to lead through the conversation without giving any direction, and they will really empower the coaches to find the solution for themselves.
Perfect. Absolutely. And that is exactly what we concentrate on. It's not about being directive at all. If anything, it couldn't actually be further away from that. So you are absolutely right. And that is one of the things that we do most definitely look at. How, as a coach, can we not lead that conversation down a certain path that's on our agenda? And we also look at things called ego states. We'll just talk through those in just a moment. The parent, adult, child ego state in regards to how we communicate as well. And sometimes we don't realize we're doing that. We're doing it inadvertently. Doug's also put there as well, risk orientation, looking for opportunities. Perfect, yeah. So that's something else that we also focus on. I can't say that then. How are our eyes open to see those opportunities, because sometimes that's just what it is that we need to do. So that was a great one. Thank you, Doug.
I think that's
Okay.
important in coaching, Sam, because one of the reasons clients come to a coach is they know that they've got a problem, but they can't see the solution.
Yeah.
But you can only see the solution if you see opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So somebody has to have that bigger picture and that broader perspective. You can't provide the opportunities to the individual, but you need to be able to guide the individual towards opportunities.
Of course you
and
can.
seeing the opportunities for themselves.
Absolutely, because sometimes they can't see the wood for the trees, and that's you in that objective state that can absolutely provide that for the coachee as well. A little bit between sort of coaching and mentoring as well. So what we're trying to do, of course, from that, even though it's a foundation course, the Coaching with Purpose course, actually we're going to take you from novice and we're going to notch you up really effectively in a 20-hour program to take you from that maybe novice perspective right the way through to expert. And we do that, well, not overnight, shall we say, but it's most definitely a journey that we thoroughly enjoy going on with you guys. We don't only use the mental toughness concept, though, the MTQ+. We also use a leadership measure called the ILM 72. And this is a very interesting one. In our last cohort that we've just had from the Coaching with Purpose workshop, we actually had a very senior leader in there who was a HR director. And the ILM 72 has proved to be a very, very useful tool for this particular individual. Doug, could you just very, very briefly just tell us a little bit about the ILM 72?
Okay, the ILM 72 is in its own way a unique perspective on what leadership's about. It was originally developed in response to a requirement from the Institute of Leadership and Management, who wanted to understand why there were so many leadership models. There aren't. Almost all leadership models are the same, they're just presented differently. And what we know is that most leadership models either talk about what's required from a leader. In other words, what are their core behaviors? And the three core behaviors that we were able to identify and measure are determination to deliver. In other words, people want people at the top of an organization that know where they're going and want to get there. Also, engagement with individuals. Will you look after me as an individual? And engagement with teams. Will you create a team working culture in the organization that helps me to do my job? But those three areas of behavior can be applied in many different ways, and that depends very much on situation. So sometimes you will find that the organization is brand new, so most of the people are inexperienced, and so one thing that a leader might do is apply them in a very directive way. They might tell people what to do. If, on the other hand, the organization is very experienced and everybody knows what they're doing, the leader can operate in a different way. They can operate in a more consultative way. They can discuss things with people and let them go away and do it. The problem lies in if you start in a very directive way, as time goes on, the workforce, the employees become more experienced, and sometimes the leader doesn't change and continues to operate in a directive way, and therefore begins to impact negatively on the mood and morale of people. So with this questionnaire, we're able to identify their core behaviors, but we're also able to identify what is their prevailing leadership style. And that's important because if we can understand style, then we can change it or help people to understand where they need to change their leadership style to become more effective. So big impact on leadership coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really sort of interesting just to sort of get his steer on that, not obviously being familiar with the tool beforehand. And it was something that he was really excited about taking forwards into the business as well. So superb. Thank you, Doug. Okay, what else do we do in the workshop? So not only the psychometrics, but we also build on those skills, and we do 2 observed coaching sessions. Now, within this environment, it's super easy because you're already in the environment, and we just literally turn everybody's cameras off other than the 2 individuals that are actually coaching. And when we just went through the cohorts in July, it worked brilliantly. The first coaching intervention that we do is without any information at all. So you just coach as you do now. And then the second observed coaching intervention is literally after we have just finished all of the input and provided all of the information and those skills that we mentioned earlier as well. And I've got to say, the biggest shift I've probably ever seen in an individual happened in the July cohort. It was incredible to watch that person go from a lot of tell, a lot of fluff, to be perfectly honest, right at the very, very start of the coaching conversation, to the second intervention being granular, specific, considered, productive questions that really challenged and allowed the coach to think for themselves. The difference was incredible. And we do that in 20 hours. So we know it works, and I've seen it work many, many times down the years. And like I said, we've got the great opportunity to even just do this online as well. So that's 2 coaching observations. We also focus, though, on how we prepare for coaching sessions. We're busy. We've got stuff to do. Things get sidetracked. And we forget sometimes just to prepare and take a few moments, or a little bit more than a few moments before those coaching sessions. And we have a look at how it is that we can really prepare ourselves to succeed for our coaching interventions. Like I mentioned before, we have a look also, how do we coach successfully online? How can we make sure that it's fit for purpose and that the coachee is getting the best from the sessions and it's productive and effective? And that's something else that we also concentrate on, which, to be honest, I only really touched on in the programme previously, but now, of course, after COVID being hitting, or Rona as I call it, Corona, I felt it was really appropriate to bring that into the fold, and we concentrate on that a little bit more in the workshop now as well. We also look at communication styles, how we can get the best out of each other through talking each other's language, and powerful questions, how we can question the coachee to challenge them and to allow them to think for themselves. And compassionate listening, and linking back to what Catherine said before about those listening skills, that's something that we focus on, not just from listening to the individual, but also to ourselves as well. We focus on the GROW model, which of course is a model from John Whitmore, and there's a fantastic book called Coaching for Performance, and we also direct individuals that attend the course to focus on that as well. We also look at ego states, which is actually part of communication and transactional analysis. And we have a look at the parent, child, and adult ego states. And as a coach, where are we really? And what are we observing from the coachee to make sure that we, of course, stay in that adult state, which tends to mean that we'll have much more productive coaching session. We also look at things like limiting beliefs and what holds us back. And this is where we may also, again, find the correlations within the within the MTQ Plus reports as well, because those limiting beliefs are the things a lot of the time that really do hold us back from being successful. We also look at feedback and the different tools that we may have and utilize as a coach or as a trainer or as a facilitator, as a mentor. We look at all of the tools, and feedback is certainly one of them, to make sure that, of course, we are putting the coachee in the right place at the right time. And we also look at barriers, things that do stop us and that do get in our way. And again, just being really honest and open about, actually, this is something that really concerns me and that stopped me in the past, and I feel it's really held me back, and this is something that we really do concentrate on as well. So that's just a little bit about what's in the workshop. But one of the things that we really wanted to make sure was we wanted evidence-based practice, because coaching has always been really difficult to prove from a return on investment perspective. How can we demonstrate in a business or with an individual that we have made a difference? And when me and Doug were talking last week, we mentioned something here. So how do we demonstrate this? And Doug mentioned this word. Doug, just tell us a little bit about causality.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. So this is beginning to become one of the most important concepts in people and organizational development, because a lot of people spend a lot of money on introducing programs, introducing coaching and so on. And people will say, well, this is what I did with this person and this was the result. But you don't know that it was what you did that produced that difference. And in research and in science, there is a concept called causality. So what this means is, can you demonstrate that what you have done has changed something that will produce that outcome? And of course, here we have one of the most important elements of causality, because if we are changing through effective coaching the mental toughness or the mindset of the coachee, and we can see that the coachee's performance, agility, or well-being is improving, we are more confidently able to say we have genuinely made that difference. So what is beginning to happen is, because we're introducing this ability to measure this thing that has previously been invisible, what's going on in the head, people are now being able to say, I can show you why you're getting the results that you want, which is making a big difference in looking at things like return on investment. We're seeing a lot of growth in this area, but so is everybody else. So we are able to help with this idea of causality.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what it is that we need to demonstrate as a coach as well. So thank you for sharing that, Doug. That's superb. Okay, so not only do we get the psychometrics, not only do we get all of the skills, but you also get an EMCC accreditation off the back. But why is gaining a coaching accreditation important, even more so now in this VUCA world? What would you say that it's important? Or why would you say it's important? And this is Hang, this is Catherine. Lynn, if you want to open up your mic, please feel free to do so. Because there's a lot of coaches out there. A lot of coaches out there that don't have accreditation. So why is getting an accreditation important?
It's, you're talking about trust, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So how does that create trust then with your clients or organizations?
Yeah, I guess that in any relationships, you start with trust.
Yeah, most definitely. Doug's just added there, as a client, I want to know that you are competent. So you've got proof that you are competent because you have had to adhere to the certain standards of that accrediting body. So most definitely. Catherine, was you about to speak just a moment ago?
Yeah, it's just purely, there are so many coaches and it's really hard for people to know exactly that, who is competent and who's going to, who's trained, who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think it's important.
That's it. I mean, you know, we can all talk a good talk, if you like, but can we actually prove it? And by having the accreditation, we are showing that actually I do have those standards and that credibility as well. So yeah, most definitely. Oh, I was going to put a whiteboard up there. It doesn't matter. We've done that. So why did we choose the EMCC then? So Doug, let me just ask you this question. Why did we choose the EMCC to be our accrediting body for coaching with purpose? Oh, you are on mute now. Hang on one sec. Oops. There we go.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Oh yeah, I'm unmuted.
You are now.
Right. The bottom line is that the EMCC is bringing to the world of coaching and mentoring some very important qualities. Firstly, there are lots of organizations like business schools, there are professional bodies that have set qualifications for coaching. Some of those qualifications are very academic, but most coaches are practitioners. What is useful to know is some of the academic background to coaching, but the qualification should be very practitioner orientated.
Yep.
The EMCC is an organization that is run by coaches for coaches, but at the same time, it has acquired a reputation for the very highest standards in coaching. The second thing is that it has very usefully included the term mentoring. People tend to forget about the notion of mentoring, but mentoring can be as effective as a coaching in many situations. And there's a nice balance there. So it is more comprehensive than most other programs. But at the end of the day, it is recognized as an organization that has identified the very highest standards in coaching. I would add one other thing though, is it tends to focus on performance coaching. So if we're talking about coaching that is relevant to business and to individuals who need to achieve, this is very much probably the gold standard in coaching. There are other coaches who will focus on things like life coaching. They might find that the EMCC's content is not quite what they're looking for. But for most practical purposes, for most coaches who are engaged in working in business, EMCC, you could say, is the gold standard.
Yeah, most definitely. That was why we chose the EMCC, and that's exactly what it was that we wanted it to do when we created the program. It's for a range of abilities. This is a foundation program. It's not just about people that, you know, have been coaching for years, even though I'll come to that question in just a moment. It's incredibly relevant. And the different cohorts that we've ran the program previously, we've had such a range of abilities, and every single person has gotten so much from the particular workshops as well. And that's exactly what I was just saying there, or what Doug was saying there about why we've actually chose the EMCC also. What I have done, I have just popped into chat for you the EIA, which is the individual award that you would get if you attend the program, which is the European Individual Accreditation Award. And of course, there is some elements around that that you guys would need to achieve to actually be awarded that particular coaching standard. These, just very, very briefly, I'm not going to go through all of them, are what it is that you need to provide as evidence from the perspective of submission. So we have things like a personal statement, that declaration. You can bring prior learning to the course as well. So let's just say you've been a coach for the last 5 years. You can bring all of that experience in with you, and you can use that as evidence as well. A lot of people don't necessarily write things down, but this is now your opportunity to be able to do that. So things like client logs, supervision, and reflective practice as well. But all of this is explained in full within the workshop. That's that question that I've just said just a second ago. What if I've coached for many years? Can I bring that experience in? Yes, you can, absolutely. And I would most definitely encourage people to do that as well. It's not a case of starting again to start to evidence it from now at all. Not about that. So again, this is just a very, very brief synopsis of the workshop. So if you do want any further details at all in regards to the workshop, then just please feel free to either email me or Doug, whoever, but I'll just pop my email address into chat for you if anybody wishes to contact me to learn a little bit more about the workshop. But I will also be popping into chat a brochure as well. So what I'd like to know then, just conscious of time, what questions do you have about this particular session this morning? Anybody have any questions?
You already answered mine. I was interested in what level it was targeted, whether it was could be novice or yeah. So.
Absolutely, we've had a real broad range of individuals, and there is something that we've just learned that we can actually do for people with a little bit more experience than a foundation level, but that would be a conversation offline, shall we say, that we can potentially do as well. But yeah, most definitely. Thank you, Catherine. I have just popped in the brochure for the workshop as well. That's just gone into chat. Feel free, please, to take that out of chat and download that particular brochure there. You can have a read through. These are some of the books that we refer to in the program as well. Of course, Developing Mental Toughness, written by our lovely Doug. And of course, we also focus on the leadership coaching, which Doug also had a hand in writing also. The games that people play, the chimp paradox, some of you may well be familiar with this, mindset, and of course that coaching for performance, John Whitmore also wrote, and we refer to that also within the workshop. Other than that, guys, I would like to say thank you very, very much. Thoroughly enjoyed this session this morning. I am 1 minute over, so I do apologise. But thank you very much for all of your attention and questions and interaction as well. So if anybody does wish for any further information, please feel free to pop my details into chat, and you also have the brochure there. I will be online though for the next few minutes if anybody wishes to take anything offline. Once I have paused that recording, then that would be awesome. I've just got one other question for you. Am I okay to pop this recording onto YouTube?